It was my sophomore year of college, and I was completely drowning. The classes were getting harder, and my grades were starting to slip for the first time in my life. I couldn't sit still and study. An hour of reading felt like a week. I'd open a textbook, read a single paragraph, and find my mind had gone somewhere else entirely. I spent weeks reading forums online and became convinced I had ADHD. Every symptom they described was my life. The inability to focus, the disorganization, the constant feeling of being overwhelmed by simple tasks. It all fit. The logical thing to do was to get an official diagnosis. Go to a doctor, get a prescription for Adderall or something. But I was terrified of that. I didn't want a mental condition on my permanent medical record. I didn't want to become dependent on a prescription. And I definitely didn't want to explain it to my parents. I just wanted a quick fix to get me through the semester. That's when I discovered the world of research chemicals. I found forums where people talked about legal alternatives to prescription stimulants. They called them nootropics and study aids. One chemical, 4-FMPH, came up over and over. People swore it was just like Ritalin, but stronger and cleaner. And because it was sold for research purposes, it was in a legal gray area. You could just buy it online. I found a vendor based in the Netherlands that had decent reviews. The website was basic, and the payment method was a sketchy cryptocurrency transfer. But my desperation pushed all the red flags away. I told myself it was safer than buying pills off some guy on campus. I told myself I was being smart and resourceful. I placed an order for 5 grams of white powder. It was a decision that would end up costing me so much more than the $50 I sent overseas. The package arrived about 2 weeks later. It was a small bubble mailer with a custom sticker from the Netherlands declaring it as a pigment sample. There was no return address. Inside, there was nothing but a single, unlabeled Ziploc baggie filled with a fine, white crystalline powder. No instructions, no branding, nothing. Just the stuff. I dumped a small pile onto my desk. I didn't own a scale, so I just eyeballed what looked like a reasonable amount. I'd read on the forums that the best way to take it was to snort it. So I crushed the crystals with my student ID and racked up a small line. My heart was pounding before I even did it. I leaned down and snorted the line. It burned like hell going up my nose, a sharp chemical sting that made my eyes water. Then, about 30 seconds later, it hit me. It wasn't focus. It was a freight train of pure euphoria. A warm, electric wave washed over my entire body, starting from the back of my head and spreading down to my toes. Everything in my room suddenly seemed brighter, more vivid. The music coming from my cheap laptop speakers sounded like the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. I felt powerful, invincible. I thought to myself, this is it. This is the fix. I sat down at my desk, opened my textbook, and tried to study. But I couldn't. The euphoria was too loud, too distracting. The words on the page seemed to dance. I couldn't sit still. I stood up and started pacing my tiny dorm room, feeling like I could solve any problem in the world, as long as it wasn't my calculus homework. After about an hour, the incredible feeling started to fade, and it was replaced by a crushing emptiness. My mind felt hollow, and my body felt sluggish and drained. The only thought I had was that I needed to feel that way again. Immediately, I went back to the baggie and poured out another line. This one was bigger. The rush came back just as strong, washing away the awful come-down. That's how the next 24 hours went. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. It was just a non-stop cycle. I'd do a line, feel on top of the world for an hour, and then feel that horrible, desperate crash. Then I'd immediately chop up another one, over and over again. My brain wasn't thinking about grades anymore. It was just thinking about the next line. By the time the sun came up, I was just a fiend, chasing a high that was getting shorter and weaker every single time. The next 24 hours were just a repeat of the first, but worse. I didn't sleep. The thought of food was disgusting. The baggie of white powder was the only thing that mattered. By now, the euphoria was completely gone. I wasn't doing lines to feel good anymore. I was doing them just to stop feeling so indescribably awful. The crash after each dose was a physical and mental black hole, and the only way out was another line. I remember just sitting on the edge of my bed, completely spun out and paranoid. My heart was pounding out of my chest, a frantic, irregular rhythm that hadn't stopped for 2 days. My whole body was shaking. I hadn't left my room. I hadn't answered my phone. It was just me, the mess, and the constant nagging need for more. My hands felt cold. It was a strange feeling, because the rest of my body was clammy and sweating. I rubbed them together, trying to get them warm, but it was a deep, painful cold that went right to the bone. It hurt to make a fist. That's when I looked down at them. They weren't the right color. My fingernails were a dark, scary shade of purple. My fingertips, and then my whole fingers, were fading into a pale, grayish blue. They looked like they belonged to a dead person. They didn't look like my hands at all. I ripped my socks off in a complete panic. My toes were the same horrifying blue color, and they were so cold, it felt like they were on fire. The pain was excruciating. I thought to myself, this isn't normal. This isn't just a side effect. This is something very, very wrong. A wave of pure terror washed over me, cold and sharp. My body was shutting down. My mind was racing, trapped in a loop of pure panic. I needed to do something. My hands and feet weren't just cold anymore. They were burning with a painful, icy fire. I was convinced they were dying, that the tissue was going necrotic right there on my body. I thought about the hospital. I imagined trying to explain to a doctor what I had taken. A research chemical from the Netherlands called a pigment sample. They would call the cops. They would call my parents. My life would be over. In my spun-out, paranoid state, getting in trouble seemed much scarier than dying. So my brain, starved of sleep and drenched in chemicals, started looking for another solution. And then a thought hit me. And in my wrecked state, it felt like a moment of pure, logical genius. The initial feeling. The rush. What was the rush? It was a wave of warmth. It was electricity. It was everything in my body's circulatory system kicking into overdrive. That was it. Of course, it was so simple. My blood vessels were constricted. That's why my hands were blue. I needed to force them open. I needed a rush so massive, so powerful, that it would blast blood back into my extremities and save them. It wasn't the drug that was killing me. It was the fact that I wasn't taking enough of it. This insane logic felt like a lifeline. It was the only answer. I grabbed the Ziploc baggie, my hands fumbling and stiff from the cold. There was no time to be careful. No more racking up neat little lines. I tore the baggie open and dumped the remaining powder onto my desk. It was a huge pile, probably more than I had done in the past 2 days combined. I didn't hesitate. I leaned down and snorted the entire mountain of chemicals in 2 huge, desperate gasps. The burn was blinding. It felt like someone had shoved a hot poker up into my brain. My eyes flooded with tears, and the chemical taste coated the back of my throat. I stood up, waiting. My heart was already a frantic drum, but I needed more. I needed the tidal wave. The wave I was waiting for never came. There was no warmth, no electricity. There was just a sudden, blinding white noise in my head. The room tilted sideways. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, and I was falling into a black, freezing ocean. The burning in my hands and feet exploded into something new. A crawling, itching sensation deep under the skin. The psychosis hit me completely then. My brain wasn't my own anymore. I was now absolutely certain that my hands and feet were not just blue, they were dead. The tissue was necrotic, and it was being consumed by some kind of invisible, microscopic bug. I could feel them. Thousands of them, chewing their way up my arms and legs, spreading the rot. I had to stop them before they reached my heart. The thought was completely clear. A single point of light in the screaming chaos of my mind. The infected parts had to be cut off. It was the only way to save myself. I stumbled out of my bedroom and went to the kitchen. I remember being very quiet, trying not to make any sound. My roommate was in his room, and I couldn't let him know. He wouldn't understand. He would try to stop me. I opened a drawer and took out the sharpest kitchen knife we had. The metal felt ice cold in my numb, blue hand. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I had to be sanitary. I knew that. You can't just cut yourself with a dirty knife. You'll get an infection. The logic was perfect and insane. I turned on the stove in the kitchen before, and I held the tip of the blade in the orange flame coming from the gas burner until it glowed red hot. I could feel the heat on my face, but not in my hand. Then I brought it back to the bathroom. I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, the knife in my right hand, my left hand resting on my knee. I was looking at my index finger. The nail was almost black. The skin was gray and waxy. This was where I had to start. I raised the knife. The next thing I remember is the door bursting open. My roommate was standing there. His face was pale with horror. I think I just stared at him, confused. His mouth was open, but I couldn't understand the sounds coming out. It was just noise. Then he was gone, and I could hear his voice screaming my name. Then he was screaming numbers into his phone. 911, I need an ambulance. The world started to dissolve into flashes of light and sound, and then nothing. I woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a machine. My eyes fluttered open. I was in a hospital bed. The lights were dim. My hands and feet were wrapped in thick, white bandages, and a soft pain pulsed through them with every beat of my heart. A doctor came in and stood over me. He had a tired, sad look on his face. He told me it wasn't a psychotic delusion. The drug had caused such extreme vasoconstriction that it had nearly stopped all blood flow to my extremities. It wasn't rot, but it was severe, frostbite-like tissue injury. He told me that they had saved my fingers and toes, but the feeling would probably never come back. Permanent nerve damage. The words just hung there in the quiet room. My brilliant plan to save myself had crippled me. It was the summer after graduation. The 4 years of college had passed in a blur of exams, parties, and cheap beer. It was me and my 2 best friends, Alex and Ben. We'd navigated the whole chaotic experience together, from freshman dorms to our final theses. Now, with our degrees in hand, we were standing at the edge of real life, and it felt like we were about to be scattered by the wind. We knew we had to do something to mark the end of it all. One final grand adventure before we went our separate ways. We talked about a road trip or renting a cabin, but nothing felt big enough. Then Alex brought up the idea that stuck. A once-in-a-lifetime psychedelic experience. A proper journey. Not just some tabs at a party, but a real, intentional trip to send us off. The plan came together quickly. We'd go camping for a weekend, deep in a national forest a few hours away. Just the three of us, a tent, a fire, and the stars. It seemed like the perfect, sacred setting for what we had in mind. The only problem was the substance itself. We wanted the best, the purest thing we could find. We weren't amateurs. We'd all experimented before, but this was different. This was a ceremony. We decided to pool what little money we had left and turn to the darknet. We spent hours combing through listings until we found it. A vendor with a stellar reputation was advertising pure, crystalline LSD. Not on paper, not in a vial, but straight, uncut crystal. It felt like we were commissioning a holy grail. We placed the order, confident that we were about to have the profound, life-affirming celebration we'd been dreaming of. We thought we were being so careful, so smart. It was supposed to be the perfect end to our youth. We had no idea it was the beginning of the end of something else entirely. The little package arrived about 10 days later. It was just a small, discreet, padded envelope. Inside, nestled in a folded piece of paper, was a tiny glass vial filled with a minuscule amount of off-white crystal. It looked like almost nothing, barely more than a few grains of sand. This was our holy grail. We all gathered at Alex's place that afternoon. The plan was to be scientific about it. We had read for hours online about volumetric dosing. You dissolve the entire amount of crystal in a measured amount of distilled water or high-proof alcohol. That way, you know the exact concentration, and you can dose it accurately with an oral syringe. No guesswork. We thought we were being so responsible. Alex carefully uncapped the tiny vial and tapped the powder into a brand new bottle of distilled water. He swirled it gently until the last few specks dissolved completely. Now we had our solution. 100 milligrams of LSD in 100 milliliters of water. 1 milliliter per milligram. Simple. "Let's just taste it," Ben said. He was always the cautious one, just to make sure. We all agreed it was a good idea. Alex used the syringe to put a single drop onto my finger. I put it on my tongue. Instantly, my face recoiled. It wasn't tasteless like everyone said pure LSD was. It was overwhelmingly, shockingly bitter. It was a powerful chemical taste, metallic and nasty, like licking a 9-volt battery. It coated my whole mouth. "That's horrible," I said, trying to get the taste off my tongue. "It's really bitter." We all paused for a second. This was the first thing that didn't line up with our research. A seed of doubt. But we were all so invested, so ready for this journey to begin. "Maybe it's because it's a different salt form," Alex suggested, pulling an explanation out of thin air. "Or maybe it just hasn't been washed properly. It's probably fine." We wanted to believe him. The desire for the experience to be what we planned was stronger than the warning signal my taste buds were screaming at me. We were on the edge of the diving board, and we weren't about to turn back now. We ignored it. We each took the syringe, measured out our dose, and choked down the bitter water. It took less than 15 minutes. There was no gentle come-up, no slow unfurling of reality. It didn't creep in. It slammed into us. It wasn't a feeling of euphoria or wonder. It was like a switch was flipped somewhere deep in our brains, short-circuiting everything. The world didn't get brighter. It got harsher. First came the body load. It was a violent, suffocating pressure that started in my chest and head and spread everywhere. A tight, buzzing feeling, like I'd swallowed a hornet's nest. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would crack, and a cold, chemical sweat started beading on my forehead. It wasn't a pleasant tingling. It was the feeling of being poisoned, of my own nervous system turning against me. I felt physically wrong, like my body was a machine breaking down. The visuals weren't the flowing, organic patterns we were expecting. They were jagged and aggressive. The edges of everything in the room started to vibrate and fracture, breaking apart into sharp, pixelated geometries. Harsh neon lines shot across my vision like static on a broken television. The world didn't feel magical. It felt digital and corrupted. It was a cold, alien, and deeply unnerving headspace. There was no insight, only confusion. Then Ben made a sound, a low groan. I looked over at him. He was completely pale, clutching his stomach. His eyes were wide with pure terror. "I feel really sick," he said, his voice trembling. "This isn't right. My body, it feels like it's full of electricity. It hurts." He was right. All the sacredness of our planned ceremony was gone. This wasn't a journey. It was a chemical assault. The memory of that horribly bitter taste flooded my mouth, and I knew with sickening certainty that we had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. This wasn't LSD, and we were completely trapped in whatever it was. Ben's complaint about the pain wasn't just a complaint, it was a prelude. His breath started coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He scrambled to his feet, eyes bugging out of his head, and started clawing at his own throat. "I can't breathe," he croaked, his voice tight and strained. "It's swelling shut. My throat is closing." He stumbled around the room, bumping into furniture like he was blind. The panic in his eyes was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "It's hot," he screamed. A real, piercing scream this time. "My skin is on fire. Make it stop." He started tearing at his shirt, his whole body trembling. Alex and I were just frozen, completely powerless. We didn't know what to do. Then the words stopped. His screams dissolved into a series of horrible, guttural sounds. Just raw, animal noises of pure terror and pain. He wasn't a person anymore. He was just a body being tortured by a chemical. He clawed at his face, leaving red marks on his own skin. His jaw locked in a silent scream. All of a sudden, his back arched violently. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he fell backward, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. His body went rigid for a second, and then he started convulsing. His limbs thrashed against the floorboards, his teeth chattering so hard I was sure they would break. We could only stand there and watch our friend seizing on the floor, trapped in a hell we had willingly ingested. The sound of Ben's seizure was the only thing in the world. It was a wet, rhythmic thudding against the tent floor, punctuated by the horrible, fast chattering of his teeth. Alex was just standing there, a statue with wide, empty eyes. But the sound broke something in me. My paralysis snapped. I had one thought, pounding in my head with the same rhythm as Ben's body hitting the ground. "Phone, 911, phone, 911. I scrambled on my hands and knees over to my pack. The zipper felt like a complex puzzle I couldn't solve. My fingers were clumsy and disconnected from my brain. I finally tore it open and dumped everything onto the floor. No phone. Alex's pack, same thing. The car. The phone was in the car. I fumbled with the tent zipper and stumbled outside into the cold night air. The real world was even more broken than the one inside. The fire we had built was a vortex of purple and orange auras, sucking the darkness into itself. I could see the car. not even 100 feet away, just past a thin patch of trees. That's all it was. A few trees. I just had to get to the car. I took a step towards the trees, and they all moved. The forest floor seemed to tilt under my feet. The trees weren't wood anymore. They were tall, gaunt figures made of black static, and their branches were long, sharp fingers that clawed at the sky. As I got closer, the space between them shifted and bent. What was a clear path a second ago was now a solid wall of writhing trunks. I pushed forward anyway, thinking I could just force my way through. I took maybe 10 steps into the darkness between them. I could still hear the thudding from the tent behind me. It was getting fainter. I turned around to see how far I'd gone, and the tent wasn't there. There was no campfire. There was just more forest, an endless, repeating pattern of hostile, jagged trees in every direction. Panic surged through me, cold and absolute. I was completely lost, utterly lost, 10 feet from where I started. I could still hear it, the faint, desperate sound of my friend's body convulsing somewhere in the darkness, and I was trapped. I was useless. I screamed for help, but the sound was swallowed by the buzzing in my own ears. I was in a labyrinth of my own making, and my friend was dying right next to me. The next thing I remember is the blindingly white ceiling of a hospital room. The jagged, terrifying visuals were gone, but a thick, soupy fog still filled my head. The chemical bitterness was still on my tongue. I could hear hushed voices in the hallway and the steady, rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere nearby. My parents were there. Their faces were drawn and exhausted, a mixture of relief and a deep, unfamiliar sadness. Eventually, a doctor came in to talk to me. He told me that Alex had managed to find a spot with a single bar of cell service and had called an ambulance. They found me wandering in circles in the woods, screaming. They found Ben still on the tent floor. Then came the words that fractured the rest of my life. Ben was alive. The doctor said it, and for one single, beautiful second, the universe felt right again. But then he kept talking. The seizure was prolonged over 20 minutes. His brain was starved of oxygen for too long. He had severe hypoxic brain damage. The doctor used different words, but that's what it boiled down to. He was alive, but he wasn't really there anymore. I saw him a few days later. He was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at a blank wall. He could barely speak. The light was gone from his eyes. And Alex? We couldn't even look at each other. There was nothing to say. The guilt between us was a physical thing, a solid wall that we could never break down. Our friendship, that whole world we had built for years, was just another casualty. It died in that tent. It's been years, but it never leaves. I don't have nightmares about the static trees or the melting fire. I have nightmares about the sound, the wet, rhythmic thud of Ben's head hitting the tent floor. I dream that I'm lost just feet away, paralyzed and useless, listening to my best friend's life get beaten out of him. We went looking for a profound experience that would bind us together forever. Instead, I'm just haunted by the fact that our entire world was destroyed by a few grains of mislabeled powder in a tiny glass vial. For me, it wasn't some big dramatic event that started it. It was a slow, creeping rot. I had a good job in finance, a nice apartment, and all the appearances of success. But underneath, I was completely unraveling. Every morning, I woke up with my heart pounding, a knot of pure dread in my stomach before my feet even hit the floor. The subway ride to work was an exercise in just trying to breathe. My job involved a lot of presentations and client meetings. I used to be good at them. Now, my hands would shake so badly I couldn't hold my notes. I'd be in the middle of a sentence and my mind would just go completely blank, overwhelmed by the feeling that everyone was staring at me, judging me. It was crippling anxiety, and it was getting worse by the day. I knew I needed help, but I was so deeply, profoundly ashamed. The idea of walking into a psychiatrist's office and admitting that I couldn't handle my own life felt like an impossible failure. Having generalized anxiety disorder on my medical record felt like a brand, a permanent mark of weakness that could ruin my career if anyone ever found out. So I started looking for my own solution late at night in the blue light of my laptop screen. I ended up on Reddit, on forums dedicated to research chemicals. I spent hours reading. And that's where I first found it. Etizolum. The posts were glowing. People called it a miracle. They said it was like Xanax, but cleaner, with less brain fogs and less potential for addiction. It was a functional benzodiazepine, perfect for killing anxiety without knocking you out. They called it safer. That word stuck with me. Safer. It was a loophole, a way to get the relief I desperately needed without the stigma of being a patient. I found a vendor with hundreds of positive reviews. The website was slick and professional looking. I ordered a gram of pure etizolum powder. It was remarkably cheap. I paid with a cryptocurrency I didn't understand and entered my shipping information. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. The solution was in the mail. I thought I had outsmarted the system, that I had found a secret, clever way to fix myself. Little did I know that I had just purchased a one-way ticket to a whole new kind of hell. About a week later, a small flat envelope showed up in my mailbox. There was no return address, just a customs label from Spain that called the contents an ink pigment sample. Inside, there was nothing but a tiny, heat-sealed mylar baggie containing a fine, bright white powder. No label, no instructions, no information at all. I had actually tried to be responsible. I'd bought a cheap digital milligram scale on Amazon for $20, determined to dose this stuff properly. The forums said a standard dose of etizolum was 1 milligram. I knew that was a tiny amount, so I had to be precise. I carefully tore open the bag and poured a small amount of the powder onto the weighing tray. I took a tiny metal scoop and tried to portion out a single milligram. 1 milligram. The number on the little screen kept flickering between 0, 1, and 2. It was so sensitive that my own breath seemed to make it jump. It was unbelievably frustrating. Finally, it settled on 1, or what I thought was 1. I looked at the little pile of powder on the tray. It was just a few specks, barely visible. It seemed like nothing. There was no way something that small could do anything. But the science was the science. I felt like a chemist, in control. I licked my finger, dabbed the tiny pile of powder, and put it on my tongue. It dissolved almost instantly. It had a faint, slightly chemical taste, but it wasn't bitter or unpleasant. I sat back in my office chair, closed my eyes, and waited for the relief to come, for the knot in my stomach to just dissolve. I felt a sense of pride. I had done it. I had solved my own problem, no doctors and no stigma needed. The next thing I remember, my cheek was pressed against the cold hardwood of my living room floor. A sharp, dusty smell filled my nose. Sunlight was cutting a bright, painful line across the carpet and directly into my eyes. I groaned and tried to roll over. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. My head throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, like I'd been sleeping on a rock for a week. I managed to push myself up into a sitting position. The room was a complete disaster. It didn't look like my apartment anymore. The coffee table was overturned, its legs pointing at the ceiling. Cushions were thrown off the couch. A lamp was on its side, the shade crushed. An empty glass lay in a puddle of something dark and sticky near the wall. My first thought wasn't fear, just a profound, dizzying confusion. What happened here? My phone was on the floor a few feet away, screen lit up and buzzing faintly against the wood. I crawled over to it, my whole body feeling like it was made of lead. The screen was a wall of notifications, missed calls, voicemails, texts, dozens and dozens of them. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. 28 missed calls from my mom, 15 from my sister, 7 from my boss, a few from my neighbor. The texts were a horrifying scroll of increasing panic. My mom, "Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me the second you get this." My sister, "Mom is freaking out. We're about to call the police. What is going on?" Then one from my neighbor, sent late at night. "What the hell is going on in there? If you don't turn that music off, I'm calling the cops. This is your final warning." Music? I looked at the top of the screen to check the time. But it wasn't the time that caught my eye. It was the date. Friday. That couldn't be right. I remembered everything from Tuesday. I remembered the little baggie arriving. I remembered pouring the powder onto the scale. I remembered licking the 1 milligram off my finger on Tuesday evening. I stared at the letters on the screen. Friday. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 whole days had passed. 3 entire days were just gone. I tried to reach back in my memory, to find anything after the moment I tasted the powder. There was nothing, just a huge, silent, black void. I had no idea what I had done. My brain was screaming. 3 days. A 72-hour black hole where my life used to be. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely hold the phone. I needed to know what happened. I needed some kind of clue, a breadcrumb trail through the void. My thumb, moving on its own, opened my social media app. Maybe I had posted something. I had. It was a nightmare. My feed was a wall of text. Long, rambling, all-caps paragraphs posted every hour for what looked like 2 straight days. It was my account, my picture. But the words were from a complete stranger. A deranged, paranoid stranger. They were disjointed screeds about my next-door neighbors, the quiet couple in 3B. I accused them of being government informants sent to monitor me. I listed their work schedules. I described their car. I called them assets in a deep state surveillance operation and told everyone to watch out for them. The angry text from my neighbors suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. I just kept scrolling, horrified, a digital archaeologist unearthing my own meltdown. I threw the phone down. I couldn't look anymore. The words on the screen felt like a violation. But the trash department was real. I had to see what else I had done. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady, and walked into the kitchen. More mess. Cabinets were open, a chair was knocked over. And then I saw it. Sitting right there on the kitchen counter, next to a dirty plate, was a red plastic gas can. It was the one I keep in the little storage shed out back for the lawnmower. It belongs in the shed, not in my kitchen. I picked it up. It was light. Empty. A cold, heavy dread started in my stomach and spread through my entire body, freezing me in place. The paranoid posts online were one thing. But this? An empty gas can? What in God's name had I done? A sharp knock on my apartment door shot through the silence. It was so loud it felt like it was inside my head. My heart stopped. I knew what this was. The consequences were here. I stumbled to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 men in plain clothes. They didn't look like the cops you see on TV. They just looked tired. I opened the door an inch. They held up badges and said they were police detectives. They asked if they could come in. My mind was a blank. I couldn't think of a reason to say no, so I just nodded and stepped aside. They walked into the living room, their eyes taking in the overturned coffee table and the general mess. I didn't say anything. I just waited. One of them pulled a small tablet out of his jacket pocket. "We got a call from your neighbor," he said. More than one, actually. He sent us this from his security camera. He held up the tablet and pressed play. It was a video of my backyard, filmed from an upstairs window next door. The quality was grainy, lit by a single security light. And then I saw myself, or a version of me. This person moved with a dead, deliberate calm that made my skin crawl. He was holding the red gas can I'd found in my kitchen. He walked directly to my tool shed. He didn't stumble. He didn't hesitate. He just unscrewed the cap and began methodically dousing the small wooden structure, splashing gasoline all over the walls and the roof until the can was empty. He tossed the can aside. Then he pulled a lighter from his pocket, flicked it on, and simply dropped it. The shed erupted in a silent, blossoming ball of fire on the little screen. This version of me stood there for a long moment, watching it burn. He even tilted his head slightly, like he was admiring it. Then he turned and walked calmly back toward the house, disappearing from the frame. The detective turned the screen off. The room was completely silent. I didn't scream or cry. I just watched the blank screen, seeing the fire replay in my head. I had no memory of it, not a single second. But I had just watched myself do it. The black hole wasn't empty. It was full of arson. The detective put the tablet away. The silence in the room was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. There was nothing to say. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. I had just watched myself do it. I just stood there, in the middle of my wrecked living room, waiting for the world to end. One of the detectives just said, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." And I did. The click of the handcuffs was quiet and final. They walked me out of my apartment, past my neighbor's door. I couldn't look at it. The ride to the station happened in a complete, muffled haze. It didn't feel real. It felt like I was watching a movie about someone else, and I was just waiting to see what happened next. What happened next was a felony arson charge. They sat me down in a small gray room, and a public defender I had just spoken to for 5 minutes told me the reality of my situation. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake that could be explained away. There was video evidence. I had intentionally set a fire on my property with reckless disregard. Felony arson. The words just hung there in the air. My life was completely and utterly destroyed in an instant. The job I was so anxious about, the career I was trying to protect from the stigma of getting help, it was gone. I was fired over a brief, clipped phone call. And my savings, that safety net I had spent years building, was just gone. It vanished into the bank account of a criminal defense attorney in a matter of weeks. It was all gone. Everything. My job, my money, my freedom, and my future. And for what? For a 3-day psychotic blackout I have no memory of. All of it erased because of a single dose of white powder I bought on the internet. A dose I took thinking it would be safer than going to a doctor. I'd been a daily smoker for almost 10 years. At first it was fun, something to do with friends. But by this point, it was just a habit, like brushing my teeth. It wasn't an experience anymore. A joint after work didn't unravel my mind or make music sound better. It just made my eyes red and made me want to eat a whole box of cereal. The magic was gone. I was just bored. That boredom led me to the internet, same as it always does. I started digging through drug forums, looking for a way to get that feeling back, but stronger. I was chasing the ghost of my first few highs, and I wanted to find it. That's how I discovered the world of synthetic cannabinoids. People on the forums called them noids. These weren't the old-school herbal blends like Spice or K2 that people used to smoke when they were on probation. This was the next level. Pure, crystalline powders ordered directly from labs, designed for one thing and one thing only: ultimate potency. It was a whole subculture of people who thought weed was for amateurs. I spent a week reading trip reports, getting more and more fascinated. There was one specific noid that everyone was raving about. They said it was a new generation chemical. The reports were insane. Users described its effects as almost immediate, an overwhelming power that just flattened you. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be flattened. I found a vendor, paid with some crypto, and a gram of the white powder was on its way. I felt a kind of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I thought I was about to unlock some secret level of getting high. I had no idea I was really just buying a ticket for a 10-minute trip to the absolute center of hell. The package landed in my mailbox about a week later. It was a standard, flimsy white envelope with a Chinese customs declaration sticker calling it graphite powder. Inside was a tiny Ziploc baggie, completely unlabeled, containing about a gram of a clumpy, off-white powder. I remembered the warnings from the forums. They were all over the place. People were very, very clear about the potency. Start with an amount so small you can't even see it. Whatever you think is too little, use less than that. I wasn't some idiot kid. I was going to be careful. I had some legal herbal smoking blend I'd bought from a head shop. It was basically just dried leaves that did nothing. I packed a small amount into a clean bowl. Then, using the tip of a paper clip, I carefully separated a single, tiny speck from the clump of noid powder. It was barely bigger than a grain of salt. This seemed like the responsible way to do it. I put the speck on top of the herbs in the bowl. I sat down on my couch, took a breath, and brought the lighter to the bowl. I made a conscious effort to take the smallest hit I possibly could. Just a tiny little puff, not even enough to really fill my lungs. I just wanted to taste it, to see what would happen. See, it happened before I even exhaled. There was no rush, no tingling, no change in perception. It was like a cosmic power switch was thrown. The sound from the television just cut out. Not like it was muted, but like the concept of sound had been deleted. The feeling of the couch beneath me vanished. The air in my lungs just stopped existing. My mind didn't race. It didn't go blank. It froze. It was like a computer crashing. But the crash was my entire consciousness. One single, silent, eternal moment. There was no fear, no thought, no me. There was just a frozen picture of my living room, and I was gone. But I wasn't gone. Not completely. My body was gone. The world was gone. But my awareness was still there. It was just trapped. It's hard to explain. It was like the universe had hit pause, but my mind was the only thing that hadn't. I was caught in the single frame of reality right before the drug fully took over. The television in front of me wasn't moving. The lighter on the table was frozen. There was no sound. There was no time. I couldn't think in words. There was no inner monologue. There was no, "What's happening?" or "Am I going to be okay?" There wasn't enough time for a thought to form, because time wasn't moving. There was only one feeling, playing on an infinite loop. It was terror, a pure, contentless terror. It wasn't a fear of dying or a fear of anything specific. It was the raw signal of alarm, with no cause and no object. The feeling you get in the split second before a car crash, stretched out into forever. I was conscious, but I could do nothing. I couldn't move. I couldn't process. I couldn't even form a memory. There was only the knowing, the horrible, silent, screaming knowledge that I was stuck in a single moment, and that this moment was all that would ever exist again. It was eternity, and it was terrifying. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. There was no transition. There was just the infinite, silent scream of that frozen moment, and then there was nothing. A black, empty void. I didn't wake up. I didn't come down. I was just gone. I only know what happened from the outside because my two friends were there, and they told me the story later. They said they watched me take that tiny hit. They saw me exhale, and then they saw me just stop. They said I sat bolt upright on the couch. My back went completely rigid, like a board. My eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead at the blank television screen. But they weren't seeing anything. They were just wide, glassy, and completely unblinking. They started talking to me, then yelling my name. They waved a hand in front of my face. Nothing. I was a statue. They told me I stayed like that for 3 minutes. 3 of the most terrifying minutes of their lives, just watching me sit there, frozen and unresponsive. They thought I was dead with my eyes open. They were about to call 911. Then, just as suddenly, all the stiffness left my body at once. I just folded. My head slumped down to my chest, and I fell sideways onto the couch cushions, like a puppet with its strings cut. They rushed over and found I was breathing, but I was completely unconscious. A dead weight. For them, it was 3 minutes of watching their friend look like a corpse. For me, it was an eternity trapped in a single moment of absolute terror. I still don't know which is worse. I came to on the couch. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment there was the black, empty nothingness. And the next, I was looking up at the ceiling fan. My friends were there, their faces right over me, looking pale and terrified. Their mouths were moving, making sounds. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" I could hear them, but it was like listening to a television in another room. The sound was muffled and distant. I sat up. The room looked normal, but it felt fake. It was like I was watching my life on a television screen, and the screen was my own eyes. I was inside my head, piloting a body that didn't feel like it belonged to me. I remember looking down at my hands, turning them over and over. They looked like my hands. They had the same scars and calluses, but they felt like props. They felt like a stranger's hands that had been attached to my arms. My friends tried to tell me what had happened. They told me I was a statue for 3 minutes, that they thought I was dead. I nodded as they spoke, but the words had no weight. It was like they were describing a scene from a movie they had seen, and I was only half interested. There was no fear, no relief, no emotion at all. There was just a vast, buzzing emptiness, a total disconnect between me and the world, between me and myself. The drug wore off, but that feeling never did. The next day, and the day after that, I was still a spectator. I would walk, talk, eat, and go through the motions of being alive. But none of it felt real. It was like living in a dream you can't wake up from. I had been so bored with my own reality, I went looking for something to make it feel more intense. That single, tiny speck of powder didn't make reality more intense. It just broke it. It shattered my connection to everything, and I've been living behind a pane of glass ever since. I was in my 3rd year of college, a philosophy undergraduate, and I was becoming a cliché. I wasn't just reading about solipsism and simulation theory for class. I was living inside of them. The ideas had taken root in my head and were starting to crowd everything else out. I'd be in a lecture hall, looking at the 200 other students, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just complex NPCs, algorithms designed to make my world feel populated. The more I thought about it, the less real everything seemed. It was like I was seeing the cracks in the world, the little glitches in the matrix, a conversation that felt scripted, a person's expression that seemed to lag for a microsecond. I started to feel this weird, creeping sense of detachment from everything, like I was the only real person playing a massive, single-player game. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also exhilarating. My mind got stuck in a loop. If this is all a construct, a simulation, there had to be a way to prove it. There had to be a way to force a system error, to peek behind the curtain and see the code. I became obsessed with this idea. It felt like the most important question in the universe, and I was the only one brave enough to try and answer it. I decided I was going to test the hypothesis myself. My research shifted from philosophy textbooks to drug forums and wikis. I was looking for a tool, a way to forcibly disconnect my consciousness from the consensus reality I was trapped in. That's when I discovered dissociatives, and one in particular kept coming up, 3-MeO-PCP. The trip reports were exactly what I was looking for. People described profound delusions of grandeur, feeling like they were God, a total detachment from their own body and the physical world. For them, it was a side effect. For me, it sounded like the goal. I found a ClearNet vendor based in Europe that sold it. For about 60 euros plus shipping, I could get a whole gram of it sent to my dorm. I told myself it was for a philosophical experiment, that I was a psychonaut exploring the far reaches of the mind. I placed the order, feeling like I was about to make a monumental discovery. I thought I was about to finally see if anything was real. I had no idea I was about to find out what happens when you completely shatter your own reality, with no way to put it back together. The gram of 3-MeO-PCP arrived in a plain brown envelope a week later, marked as a printing toner sample. I remember feeling a jolt of almost religious excitement. This was it, the key. I had my milligram scale ready. I was a scientist on the verge of a breakthrough, not just some kid getting high. I measured out what the forums called a strong dose, 25 milligrams. I dissolved the white powder in a glass of water and drank it down. This was for philosophy. This was for the truth. The first 10 minutes were nothing. Then the floor just seemed to fall away. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a realization. The sense of detachment that had been creeping up on me for months snapped into place with the force of a tectonic plate shift. My body, my dorm room, the sound of the AC unit. It all became a movie I was watching. The character on the screen was me, but I was the one in the audience. I was finally free. I stood up. The thought was so clear, so perfect. It was like a divine revelation. The simulation was real. This was a game, and I had just found the admin password. The people outside weren't real. The rules weren't real. Consequence was just a programmed illusion to keep the NPCs in line. And I wasn't an NPC anymore. I walked out of my room with a feeling of absolute, serene power. I went to the main campus library. It was full of them, the NPCs, all bent over their books, running their study subroutines. It was beautiful, in a way. I walked to the center of the main reading room. I needed to show them. I needed to break the game so everyone could see the code. I climbed onto a massive oak table, my movements feeling fluid and perfect. "None of this is real," I shouted. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like a broadcast. "You're all just code. Wake up. I'm the user." A few of the NPCs looked up, their faces registering pre-programmed confusion. It was fascinating to watch. I started kicking their laptops off the table. They crashed to the floor, but the sound was dull and unimportant. They were just pixels. I pushed over a massive bookshelf. It fell with a slow-motion grace, a shower of non-existent books. I wasn't destroying anything. I was just manipulating the environment. I was waiting for the developers to show up, to patch the exploit. The next thing I saw was a flash of yellow light, and 1,000 volts of pure, undeniable reality hit my chest. The taser didn't just hurt my body, it shattered my omniscience. One searing, agonizing second of pain was enough to prove everything I thought I knew was wrong. The god of the simulation collapsed to the floor, just a terrified, twitching kid in a library. I woke up strapped to a hospital bed with my parents crying in the corner of the room. The experiment was over. My attempt to prove that nothing was real had ended with the most real consequences imaginable. Felony charges for vandalism, immediate expulsion from the university, and a court-ordered stay in a psychiatric ward. My life, the one I was so sure was just a complex video game, was completely and utterly ruined. I went looking for a cheat code to beat the system. That's the one thing all these stories have in common, isn't it? A quick fix for a brain that doesn't focus. A safer way to deal with anxiety. A chemical shortcut to a profound experience or a way to escape boredom. A secret key to unlock the nature of reality itself. We all thought we were being so smart, so clever for finding a loophole that no one else saw. But there are no loopholes. There's no secret level. There's no back door to reality. There's only the front door, and it's full of pain and work and slow, difficult progress. The moment you think you found a way to skip all that, a gram of powder that can fix you or enlighten you better than a doctor or a therapist or your own effort ever could, that's the moment you've already lost. You're not breaking the system. You're just breaking yourself against it. I sat on the edge of my desk chair and waited for the truth to arrive. The 25 milligrams of white powder were dissolved and down. It had been about 10 minutes, and nothing had happened. I remember a flash of disappointment. Maybe my vendor was a scam. Maybe the dose was too low. Maybe the universe was just going to stay quiet. And then it happened. It wasn't a slow dissolve. It was a click. A loud, psychic click. Like a lock disengaging in the center of my brain. One instant, I was a student in a dorm room. The next, the dorm room was a set of cheap particle board and drywall constructed around me. And I wasn't a student anymore. I was the audience. The profound detachment that I had been chasing for months wasn't a feeling. It was just a fact. The nagging question that had consumed my life for the past year wasn't a question anymore. It was an answer. And the answer was so simple, so obvious, that I almost laughed. Of course I was the only real person. How could I have ever thought otherwise? I looked down at my hands. They were props. Very convincing, high-fidelity props, but they were not mine. I could move them, but the sense of ownership was just gone. I stood up, and the sensation was like moving a character in a video game. The feeling of the carpet under my feet was a simulated texture, a piece of haptic feedback sent to my brain. The hiss of the radiator wasn't a sound. It was an audio file on a loop. A profound sense of calm washed over me. It was a powerful, absolute peace. All the anxiety, all the philosophical doubt, all the fear I had about my place in the world just evaporated. They were parameters of the simulation, designed to keep me engaged, to make the game feel real. And I had just turned them off. I had root access. I looked out my window. I saw people walking across the quad. They weren't people. They had no inner life, no consciousness, no history. They were scripts, sophisticated automatons executing their simple routines. Walk to class, check phone, pretend to talk to each other. They were just scenery for my experience. It wasn't sad. It wasn't lonely. It was beautiful. The entire, vast, complex universe was a private theater built just for me. And in that moment of absolute divine clarity, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just keep this to myself. It was too important. I had to share it. I had to break the illusion. I had to wake them up. I left my dorm room and walked out onto the campus quad. The world was a masterpiece of code, a flawless rendering. The sun felt warm, but I knew it was just an environmental effect. The NPCs walking past it all gave me a wide berth, their behavioral scripts registering my godlike calm as an anomaly. It was time. I walked into the main library. It was the heart of the simulation, the central processing unit where the most complex NPC subroutines were running. It was packed. They were all there, hunched over their glowing screens and their paper books, lost in their programmed tasks. It was beautiful, but it was a prison. I found the big oak table in the center of the main reading room and climbed on top of it. My movements felt perfect, frictionless. I raised my arms. "Wake up!" my voice boomed, but it wasn't my voice. It was a system-wide broadcast. "None of this is real. This is a simulation, and you're all just code." A few of them looked up. I could see their facial expressions glitching, trying to process my input. Confusion, annoyance, fear, all pre-programmed responses. I started kicking their laptops off the table. They were just props. They hit the marble floor with a dull, distant thud. I wasn't destroying anything. I was just manipulating the environment's physics engine. I pushed over a massive, heavy bookshelf. It toppled in what felt like slow motion, a silent cascade of meaningless data. I wasn't Vandal. I was a liberator. I was waiting for the system administrators to show up. The developers. They would have to respond to an exploit this big. And then they did. 2 of them, dressed in the uniform of campus police. They were running their apprehension script. They yelled commands, but the words were just noise. One of them pulled out a small black device. I knew what it was. A developer tool. A way to de-res an errant program. The next thing I saw was a flash of yellow light, and 1,000 volts of pure, undeniable reality hit my chest. The pain wasn't a simulation. It was the most real thing I had ever felt. It was a searing, agonizing fire that didn't just hurt my body. It shattered my omniscience. The god of the simulation collapsed to the floor, just a terrified, twitching kid in a library. My experiment was over. I woke up strapped to a hospital bed. The charges for felony vandalism were real. The expulsion from the university was real. The court ordered stay in a psychiatric ward where doctors who I could no longer dismiss as NPCs tried to explain what a drug-induced psychosis was very, very real. The life I was so sure was just a complex video game was completely and utterly ruined. I went looking for a cheat code to beat the system. That's the one thing all these stories have in common, isn't it? A quick fix for a brain that doesn't focus. A safer way to deal with anxiety. A chemical shortcut to a profound experience, or a way to escape boredom. A secret key to unlock the nature of reality itself. We all thought we were being so smart, so clever for finding a loophole that no one else saw. We thought we were commissioning a holy grail, outsmarting the stigma or conducting a grand philosophical experiment. But there are no loopholes. There's no secret level. There's no back door to reality that you can buy in a little baggie of white powder. There's only the front door, and it's full of pain and work and slow, difficult progress. The moment you think you've found a way to skip all that, a chemical that can fix you or enlighten you better than a doctor or a therapist or your own effort ever could, that's the moment you've already lost. You're not breaking the system. You're just breaking yourself against it.